Our next speaker is John Seed. John Seed is the founder of the Rainforest Information Centre. Since 1979, he has been involved in the direct actions that have resulted in the protection of Australian rainforests. He has written and lectured extensively on deep ecology and has been conducting councils of all beings around the world for 35 years. In 1995, he was awarded the Order of Australian Medal by the Australian government for his services to conservation and the environment. He continues to work on rainforest conservation worldwide and offers deep ecology workshops to heal the illusion of separation between humans and the earth. Here's John.
I'm going to talk about deep ecology and environmental activism, but I'd like to start by just paying homage to the Psychedelics, which have been a really crucial part about my being here. Starting in 1972, when I was 27 years old in London, I'd been living there for 5 years, was working as a systems engineer at IBM, was in an unhappy marriage and watching the news every night. And a friend gave me some orange sunshine, which changed everything. So that I guess a month later, I'd left the marriage, given my wife everything. I told her that what she didn't want, I'd burn, and got away with the pack on my back and never looked back. A year later, I came back to Australia to visit my family, thinking that I would never live here again, and I ran into Blue Meanies at Arimba, Cyanescence, and they persuaded me to return to Australia to live, and I did so, got back here in 1973, lived up in Nimbin, started a meditation centre and a Buddhist meditation community with some friends, and thought I was going to spend the rest of my life growing veggies and delivering babies and organising meditation retreats, when, to my surprise, I found myself in August of 1979 enmeshed in what years later we'd realised was the first direct action in defence of rainforests anywhere in Australia, and it was that led me to deep ecology. Yeah, okay, so that's a beautiful artwork by Daniel Morente called Deep Ecology. My psychedelic journey continued with the campaigns that we were doing in Ecuador to protect the rainforests there, led me into a relationship with Casimiro Mamayacta, who was the ancestral shaman whose job it was to preserve the sacred mountain Galeras in the headwaters of the Amazon, and we were able to help him turn that into a national park, and in the course of that he introduced me to ayahuasca, and a couple of years later in San Francisco my life was turned around once again by ayahuasca, by Doug Tompkins, the legendary founder of the Esprit Corporation, who started the Foundation for Deep Ecology and who single-handedly protected millions of hectares of land in Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia in Chile and Argentina. And there was a hiatus of some decades, but I had some serious health issues a few years ago, a tumour behind my right eye, and I had the good fortune to be leading a deep ecology workshop when one of the participants introduced himself and said that he was someone that worked with plant medicines, and Acacia cordyii had instructed him to heal environmentalists. And I told him that that was a great coincidence because he was an environmentalist in need of healing, and one thing led to another, but we ended up with a circle of 8, including my son Bodhi and some of my closest friends, and Acacia cordyii, and with the shared intention that at the next MRI scan my tumour would shrink. And indeed, after having remained stable for a year, at the next MRI scan, the tumour was down to 30%, and the next one after that, it was gone, and it hasn't been back. So I owe my life to psychedelics in many different ways. So in 1979, I found myself at Terania Creek. Some neighbours had asked for help to protect the rainforest at the end of Terania Creek Road. I didn't know what a rainforest was. I didn't know there were rainforests in Australia, but I was interested in helping the neighbours, and so somehow I found myself there on the day when the police and the bulldozers started to move in, and something happened to me there which I still haven't recovered from, and turned my life around, and before long I was no longer interested in meditation, and I was obsessed with rainforest protection. I missed that slide earlier on. That's me with Ralph Metzner, another sort of icon in my psychedelic journey. It was he who introduced me to 5-MeO-DMT, which was the strongest such experience that I've ever had, and it was a grievous loss to the world a couple of years ago when he disappeared. So that's a picture from the Mount Nardi blockade. Mount Nardi was just above Terania Creek, the watershed into Terania Creek, and that's the picture of the morning when 200 police and the loggers arrived, and what you see there is the convoy of police cars ahead of the logging trucks, and at the front there's a four-wheel drive with the chief of police in it, and 6 of the hippies are pushing it back down the hill, and you could smell the clutch burning as the vehicle couldn't proceed up the hill. So we went on from the New South Wales temperate subtropical rainforest to the temperate rainforests of Tasmania, part of the Franklin River blockade in 1982, and then on to the Daintree a year after that, or 2 years after that, for the tropical rainforests. And in each case, the blockades were an important part of these areas being protected, turned into national parks, and eventual World Heritage listing. So this was a very powerful start to life as an activist. I went on to start rainforest movements around the world, starting in the United States, where I helped establish the Rainforest Action Network there in 1984. I did a roadshow with the Earth First movement, and this is a picture from the Earth First Round River Rendezvous on the banks, on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and I'm there with my band, which was my son Bodhi, who was I guess 9 years old then, and our friend Emu and another friend, and we were able to start rainforest action groups all over the United States. The year after that, we did a roadshow where we were able to change the policies of the Burger King Corporation, which had been the single biggest cause for the destruction of rainforests in Costa Rica. They were clearing the rainforest there to create cheap pasture for dropping a few cents off the price of a hamburger, and the huge uproar that accompanied the roadshow got them to change their policies. That's me in 1991, locked onto a vehicle that's blocking the road at Chalundi, one of the New South Wales rainforests that we protected. And that is my dearly beloved rainforest van being pushed out of the way by the police at Chalundi. So in spite of the successes in Australia, for every forest that was being saved in the first half of the 1980s, 1,000 forests were being lost around the world. And clearly there was no way to save the planet one forest at a time. That unless we could address the underlying psychological or spiritual disease that allows modern humans to imagine that we can somehow profit from the destruction of our own life support systems, clearly these actions would be of no particular significance for the future of the world. And that was when I began to look for some understanding of why humans were behaving in such a self-defeating manner. And it was then that I discovered the philosophy of deep ecology, where for the first time I felt that I was getting some answers that satisfied me. The term deep ecology was coined by the late Arne Næss, the professor of philosophy from Oslo University. And according to Næss, underlying all of the symptoms of the environmental crisis, we find the illusion of separation between human beings and the living earth, the illusion of separation. And this illusion was itself created by anthropocentrism, or human-centeredness, the idea that human beings are the centre of everything. So we are the crown of creation, we are the measure of all being. The world consists of human beings on the one hand and resources for human beings on the other hand, and anything that isn't a resource for human beings has no value. In fact, nothing has any value except the value that humans assign. Nothing has any intrinsic value except human beings. Only human beings have value. Other things may have instrumental value if they're a resource for us, but they have no value in their own right. So trees have no value, rivers have no value, and the earth itself has no value. It's just dirt until we turn it into something more valuable. Arne Næss suggested that what was needed in order to deal with this illusion of separation, he said we needed community therapies to heal that illusion of separation and to allow us to connect with and to nourish our ecological identity. He said because this mistaken identity was so deeply embedded in our culture, going back at least as far as the Old Testament, and the idea that only human beings are created in God's image, and that we are here to subdue and dominate nature, and nature is to be in fear and trembling of us, that as a result of these things, every institution of our society and our psyche, our soul, was contaminated with the anthropocentrism, and we weren't therefore going to be able to think our way out of the mess that was created. He said that ecological ideas are not enough. What we need is ecological identity, ecological self, and that we need community therapies in order to cultivate this ecological identity, to nourish it. And so together with a colleague from the United States, Joanna Macy, in 1984, we created the first of many processes and ceremonies and rituals whereby we've tried to give substance to Arne Næss's call for these community therapies. The first of these was called the Council of All Beings, and which I still practice to this day. And in the Council of All Beings, participants learn how to find an ally from the non-human world. We make a mask to represent that ally, and then we gather in council speaking on behalf of the voiceless ones from nature. Oops, go back one. So there are 3 masks from a Council of All Beings in Poland. I've continued to offer these deep ecology workshops since then. I had one last weekend at Camp Eureka, Yarra Junction, not far from here, and I've got another one planned in Melbourne in February and two in Tasmania in February. And I was away for a few years with the health issues that I mentioned earlier, but I find my enthusiasm coming back in ever-increasing waves, and it feels like a tide moving up a beach, so I'm taking on more and more of the kind of work, both activism and offering deep ecology experiences. So I think Rachel's going to pass around a sign-up sheet that if any of you would like to be contacted when there's a deep ecology workshop in your neck of the woods, if you leave me your email address, then I will contact you if there's a workshop happening near you. So this is a flyer from a deep ecology workshop organised by my friend, the late Dan Schreiber, who many of you know, back in the 2000s. So the overlap of psychedelics and deep ecology and activism in my life is kind of mirrored, I suppose, by the overlap that I find between ecology and spirituality generally. And I myself had a kind of a profound spiritual awakening at Terania Creek. I later described, in the book that I wrote with Joanna Macy and Arnie Ness a few years later, I described it as the realisation that I myself was no longer a human being speaking on behalf of the rainforests, but that I was a rainforest, part of the rainforest, that I could sense that my own DNA had spent 100 million years in the rainforests before stumbling out onto the savannah a short time ago, and that that therefore I was the rainforest speaking in my own self-defence rather than a well-meaning, do-gooder human being doing something for the other. There is no other. That's the key insight of deep ecology. Even to call it the environment pushes it over there somewhere as if it was other than my very self. But all we need to do is hold our breath for 10 minutes to recognise that no separation is possible. It's completely ridiculous. It's all happening inside us. It's all cycling through itself. And we are just one strand in this enormous web rather than the spider in the middle, which is the kind of role that we've assumed. But I realised that most people didn't have this kind of spiritual conversion to ecology that I had experienced, and that in order to reach people, it was going to be necessary to find the spiritual growing shoots in their own religious traditions. And I started with the tradition that I'd been most recently involved in, which was Buddhism, and got together with some friends and started something called the Dharma Gaia Trust. So Dharma is the Buddhist teaching and Gaia is the Greek goddess of the earth. And my friend Alan Hunt Bedina had put together a collection of essays called Dharma Gaia. So we started the Dharma Gaia Trust, where we were raising money from wealthy Buddhists in the United States, Europe and Australia to support the ecological work being done by certain Buddhist, especially Buddhist clergy in Asia. So, for example, in Thailand, some of the forest monks had started ordaining trees, turning trees into monks. They would put an orange robe, an orange cloth around an old-growth tree and perform the appropriate ritual, and then the woodcutters wouldn't go near that tree because it was now a monk. And so we went over there and we made sure that they never ran out of orange cloth. In Ladakh, we supported some nuns who had started planting trees. In Sri Lanka, the Reverend Dhirananda was teaching ecology to the young monks, and they were enlarging the sacred grove surrounding their monastery. And in so many ways, wherever we found ecological kind of excitement taking place in the Buddhist world, we supported it. Likewise with Hinduism, I got involved in a project in India where one of the most sacred places in India is the mountain Arunachala in the state of Tamil Nadu. According to Hindu mythology, the trinity of gods were meeting long ago, and two of the gods, Vishnu and Brahma, remonstrated with the third god, the supreme god Shiva, that his appearance as a column of light that stretched from infinity to infinity was dazzling the other gods beyond endurance, and Shiva in his compassion agreed to tone it down, and henceforth appeared only as this mountain Arunachala. And every year pilgrims by the millions thronged to Arunachala. One of the unfortunate consequences of that is that Arunachala became deforested during the 20th century. In the 19th century, it had been a mighty jungle clothed with forests that held even tigers. But by the time I got a letter from a nun in Ramana Maharshi's ashram at Arunachala asking for help to reforest the mountain, there was nothing left there but thorns and goats. And so we, with the help of some permaculturists from Australia, John Button and Heather Batch, we started working on Arunachala, and a big part of that work was taking the position that we were worshipping Shiva in this way, that if Shiva had wanted to appear as a barren, eroding hunk of rock, he could easily have done so, but he chose to appear as a mighty jungle, and therefore it was a sacred duty to allow his robes to be rewoven. And we slowly made progress, but the big progress was that other groups began to spring up around the mountain, local people who took on the same mission. And that continues to this day, where now Arunachala is green all over. There's a huge response every time there's a fire, and it's on its way back to becoming the jungle that it once was. So let's see. This should be a video, but before you start it, we received a lot of help from different celebrities to help protect New South Wales's rainforests in the early 2000s, and a Council of All Beings wrote the script for this film, which has endangered species speaking on their own behalf, and we were able to save about 80,000 hectares of New South Wales's rainforests in the run-up to the state elections in 2003 using this film. Olivia Newton-John was speaking as the voice of Koala, and Jack Thompson as the voice of Quoll. So are you able to start this?
To now introduce Senator Bob Brown. Thank you.
And let's celebrate a wild creature. I have with me 4 of our threatened species.
Extinction, well, what were you thinking? It's nothing less than abomination. 4 million years of evolution, diversity. There must be some solution. Down, old trees are falling, ancient forest homes are calling. Habitat, 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 habitat. It's gonna destroy our heritage. Old growth fox slogging, that out of sacrilege, yellow belly blighter, the masked owl who, twine tail quoll, and koala too.
Koala was supposed to say this, but now she's gone. We can't rely on her anymore, so it's up to us to take the lead. That means me and you. Yes, I'm talking to you, humans. You have a choice. The way this story ends is still unknown. It could be devastation and extinction you pass on to your children and your children's children. Or it could be that you can wake up in the morning and smile at yourself, having hit the brakes in time to save great wild spaces of how the world used to be. Spaces where I and my friends can live out our lives and continue to evolve alongside you into the bright future. Extinction. You choose.
Worldwide, more than 11,000 plant and animal species face their imminent demise. Humanity has initiated the first major extinction spasm since the end of the dinosaur epoch. If a state as wealthy as New South Wales can't find the means and the resolve to protect the native creatures entrusted in your care, what hope for the rest of the world? Please, people of New South Wales, speak up. Demand a fair go for all species. Put the brakes on this slide to oblivion. Your descendants and all of creation will sing your praises if you do.
It's not really the place for a POM to tell Australians about their wildlife, and I apologise for that. But I speak for the rest of the world, outside Australia. We know that you have in your state boundaries some of the greatest natural treasures in the world, fascinating and unique. If you don't look after them, nobody else will. And if they go, nothing can replace them.
So we made that film in the run-up to the state elections. We got help from David Suzuki and David Attenborough. We wrote David Attenborough a script, and then we said to him, but please add anything, your own words that you'd like, and that was that piece. That was that last piece was his contribution, and all these wildlife filmmakers gave us their footage for free and so on. And we did a roadshow for 3 months in the run-up to the election. We went from town to town, and at lunchtime, in New South Wales, at lunchtime, we'd go through the streets with the animals in their costumes, handing out leaflets to the gig that night. And then we'd show the film, and at the end of the film, when the lights came on in the hall or wherever we were, there'd be some card tables out the back with letter writing, and people would write letters to the New South Wales government to protect the forests that those species needed. I think about 80,000 people saw the film. I guess most of them wrote letters because a couple of weeks out before the election, Bob Carr announced that if the ALP was re-elected, they would save those forests. And a couple of weeks later, they legislated and protected them. So it was a very powerful move. And the idea originated in a Council of All Beings workshop, and another Council of All Beings workshop wrote a lot of the script for the endangered species, who were the stars of the show. So now, today, my activism is largely around the rainforests in Ecuador, and that's a Melbourne Rainforest Action Group organised a demonstration outside a big mining event to publicise BHP and Gina Reinhardt and other Australian miners who are cutting a swathe through the rainforests of Ecuador for copper and gold. And one of the areas that we're most concerned about is a biological reserve that we created in Ecuador in the late 80s called Los Cedros. 7,000 hectares of some of the most pristine, precious, biodiverse forest in the world. We've been protecting it for nearly 40 years from one threat after another, logging, poaching, land development, and now a corrupt decision by Ecuadorian government a few years ago allowed miners into previously protected forest designated bosques protectores. So we've been involved in a series of court cases to eject the Cornerstone Mining Company, a Canadian company from Los Cedros. And last December, a year ago, it got to the Supreme Court of Ecuador, which is the constitutional court. Now, the Ecuadorian constitution is the first in the world to enshrine the rights of nature, but it had never been tested. And so in that case, we based our defence upon the rights of nature being abrogated at Los Cedros by the mining. To everyone's amazement, the Constitutional Court ruled in our favour, threw the mining company out and created a worldwide precedent for protecting nature in a way that hadn't been done before. So, yeah. And with Deep Ecology, I'm organising more and more workshops. They're actually all filling up, which never used to happen. And so I think that maybe times are changing. I'm not sure what's going on, but I've had to do a second workshop in Melbourne, coming up a second workshop in Tasmania. That they're all filling up really quickly. And I'm also thinking that I'd like to see, I've been called to move Deep Ecology forward into closer to the mainstream than it's ever been before, and I want to try and see if I can use social media and podcasts as a way to move this forward. So I'd appreciate it, anyone who'd like to help me, find me on social media and befriend me or like what I'm doing, and that's what gets the algorithm moving to spread things further. And with podcasts, I'm, well off Broadway at the moment, but I'm aiming for Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss. And a couple of days ago, I had the great experience where one of my heroes is Tyson Yunkaporta, who wrote the book Sand Talk, and who's got a great podcast called The Other Others. And just on a whim, I found his email address at Deakin University, sent him a message saying I'd like to be on his podcast. He replied an hour later saying he was really busy this month, but he did have an hour at 1 o'clock today. And so I said, fine. And anyway, that's him in that picture. And at 1 o'clock we did the podcast, and at 5 o'clock he sent me the link. He said, hey, Braz, here's the link. And so that's kind of moved things one step along. Anyway, thanks so much for your attention, and I'd like to hand it over to any questions or conversation or discussions.
Before anything, thanks for your contribution. It's really impactful. I would like to ask you if you could give one single piece of advice to the next generation in terms of getting into ecology. What would be the single most important thing that you would say to any of them?
Well, I can't think of anything more important to do than to excavate beneath the social identity, which is who we were led to believe that we are, to the much deeper underlying reality. Because the truth is that every cell in your body is descended in an unbroken chain from the first cell of life on Earth, and that's who you are. And the name, rank and serial number, the religion, the education, the job, all of those things are just the thinnest veneer on top of this ancient being. And that if we uncover that ancient being, and if we allow that ancient being to begin to direct our activities, and if we align our day-to-day life with the dictates of that ancient knowing, then we will know what to do. And each person may discover that they have a different task, but that's how I think we need to discover it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. So a lot of today's deforesting is happening in developing nations, where in Africa and Southeast Asia, a lot of people from extreme poverty are doing these cut and slash techniques to, start farming and start cattle driving. What do we say to these people who they might say to you, well, easy for you to save your forests in your rich countries, but we're in extreme poverty here. What do we do about it? We need to eat, we need to feed our kids.
Well, I'm not sure what to say, but I guess I can address that by saying that it's always been our understanding in the conservation work that we do that the best chance of success is if we're trying to protect the forest that still has Indigenous people living in it and interested in it, and that if we can ally ourselves with those people, then we have a much better chance of success than if we try and do it without regard to them. And so, for example, in Papua New Guinea, we're able to protect 250,000 hectares of the Moribe coast by working with the Zia tribe and empowering them and recognising the legitimate aspirations for development, recognising that they had a right to make a living, that they had a right to own a fishing line and some aspro and a chainsaw and the things that they wanted, and that we couldn't just be involved in conservation without including that. And it was because we were prepared to address those aspirations that we were able to be taken seriously and that project could succeed. And I could give you many other examples of the same kind of thing in Ecuador, in Southeast Asia, in India, where it's been by working with Indigenous people and recognising their rights that we were able to have some success with conservation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Yeah.
We've just got one question from online. John, what role do you see for psychedelics in transforming our relationship with nature and bringing about systemic change?
Well, it certainly played a big role in my life. I'd probably still be working for IBM and drinking myself to death if it wasn't for psychedelics. And I've certainly met a lot of people who have been opened up into the real world, which includes nature, which is nature, by the psychedelic experience. So I think it's very important, and that's why I'm so, honoured to be invited to address all of you.
Thank you. We'll make this the last question.
Hi, John. I was interested in what you said about in Ecuador, the victory you had with the environment having been enshrined in the constitution there. I was just wondering if you're aware of any effort to sort of have that, is there any lobbying effort in other countries to have that introduced, or in Australia at all? It seems like a pretty effective way to sort of advocate on the behalf of the environment.
I don't know of anything in Australia. I have heard of similar, I think it's in New Zealand, that a river has been given certain rights, and maybe other people have other examples. I've heard that in India there has been some work in that direction. But I think Ecuador is certainly at the forefront, and there are international meetings being planned for next year to use the experience in Ecuador to move that agenda forward in other countries. So I think it's kind of in the position that human rights were in, I don't know, was it 100 years ago, when the whole idea of human rights was probably ridiculous as far as the mainstream of things was concerned, but gradually it's got to the place that it is today, and there are a lot of people working on the on the project of turning the rights of nature into something that it just is just common sense, the way that human rights is today in places like Australia.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John, for continuing to inspire us.
Thank you.